The chandelier lights sparkled over white linens and crystal glasses in the city's most exclusive rooftop restaurant. Waiters in black vests moved gracefully between tables, as laughter echoed under the warm golden glow. Elise, a 28-year-old French waitress with chestnut hair tied back in a neat bun, carried a tray of wine glasses toward the farthest VIP table. As she approached, the laughter got louder. Logan Price, 36, billionaire tech mogul, with slicked back hair and a tailored navy suit, leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Oh look, it's Mademoiselle Croissant," Logan said, his voice rising enough for nearby tables to hear. "You missed a spot on the floor, darling. Or do they mop with baguettes where you're from?" The table erupted in cruel laughter. Elise stiffened slightly, but kept her posture. Her accent was soft but noticeable as she responded, "Would you like the house red, sir?" Logan mimicked her, exaggerating her accent with mock elegance. "The house red, monsieur. Très fancy." More laughter. Elise's face remained composed, but her fingers tightened on the tray. A nearby guest shifted uncomfortably. The manager, watching from the bar, looked away. Elise turned silently, placing the wine down without a word. Logan raised his glass. "You know, you should stick to serving. Talking ruins the illusion." Elise's jaw clenched. She locked eyes with him, said nothing, and walked away. Her silence was louder than any insult. As Elise reached the staff hallway, the muffled noise of the restaurant faded behind the heavy kitchen doors. She stood for a second, inhaling sharply. The corridor was narrow, lined with coat hooks and stainless steel. She leaned against the wall, eyes closed. Her breathing was steady but shallow. Elise whispered to herself in French, "Ignore him. He does not define you." A dishwasher passed by without a glance, lost in his own world. The clink of plates echoed in the background. She removed a small notebook from her apron pocket and opened it. Inside were handwritten quotes in various languages: French, Arabic, Japanese. She traced a quote in French with her finger. "L'élégance est quand l'intérieur est aussi beau que l'extérieur." Grace is when the inside is as beautiful as the outside. She returned the notebook to her pocket, straightened her uniform, and looked at herself in the scratched mirror. Her voice low and firm, she said, "He doesn't get the last word." She pulled her shoulders back and stepped out into the chaos once more. Back on the floor, Elise resumed her duties with practiced precision. She moved through the dining room like a shadow, silent and composed. But Logan's voice rang out again. "Hey, Frenchie, don't trip over your own ego." His companions chuckled. Elise paused mid-step. Her tray was balanced, but her spine straightened slightly. A guest at a nearby table shot Logan a sharp look. Elise approached a new table, greeting the guests politely, her accent still there but her tone controlled. One of the guests, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, replied in French. Elise responded fluently and with grace. Logan's laughter halted. He glanced toward the table, confused. The woman smiled warmly. "Your French is lovely," she said. Elise bowed her head lightly. "Merci, madame." As she walked away, she noticed Logan watching her, frowning. The tables were beginning to turn. Quietly, subtly, but definitely. Elise moved behind the bar to collect a tray of champagne. The bartender, a quiet man in his 50s, glanced at her. "You good?" he asked. She nodded, eyes on the glasses. "Used to it," she replied softly. As she reached for a flute, her hands trembled slightly. The bartender noticed, but said nothing. Elise steadied herself, inhaled deeply, and raised her chin. Through the glass wall she saw Logan laughing again, oblivious to the stir his cruelty had caused. Her expression shifted, no longer just controlled, but sharpened. A storm beneath her calm. She whispered under her breath, "Mock all you want, I'm not what you think I am." She turned with the tray, posture regal. The clinking of glasses couldn't drown out the quiet power growing within her. As Elise emerged with the champagne, Logan noticed and called out once more, Mademoiselle, bring those over before they warm up. You know, like your temper? This time, fewer people laughed. Elise approached with slow steps, each movement deliberate. She set the tray down, uncorked a bottle smoothly, and poured with precision. She met Logan's gaze, steady and unwavering. "Enjoy your drink, monsieur," she said. Her tone was calm, her French accent pronounced but proud. Logan stared at her, trying to gauge whether she was mocking him back. She didn't flinch, didn't blink, just turned and walked away. The mood at the table shifted. One of Logan's friends whispered something. He didn't laugh this time. Elise returned to the bar, her heart pounding, not from shame, but from restraint. For the first time, she felt power in silence. Elise walked home under the fading glow of street lamps, her worn sneakers quiet on the cracked pavement. The city buzzed around her, but inside she was hollow. The high-rise skyline stood in contrast to her small rented apartment, 3 blocks away. She climbed the narrow staircase, passing flickering lights and chipped walls. Her key clicked in the door. The apartment was barely larger than the restaurant's walk-in freezer, with a single window overlooking an alley. Inside, French music played softly on a radio beside a stack of worn books. Elise dropped her bag by the door and slipped off her shoes. Wow. She moved through the room slowly, shedding her uniform like a second skin. In the kitchenette, she made tea, hands still slightly trembling. Her eyes fell on a photo pinned to the fridge, a young Elise in Paris, standing before the Sorbonne, smiling, free. That was before everything changed. Before her father died, before her mother's diagnosis, before she left her dream behind. She sat by the window with her tea, staring into the night. "You're not done yet," she whispered to herself in French. And in that quiet darkness, resolve began to rise. Inside the apartment, Elise stood barefoot in the living room, now dressed in an oversized sweater and leggings, sipping her tea. The silence was gentle. Her bookshelf was lined with French poetry, English novels, and language textbooks in every major script. On the small desk sat a closed laptop and a framed photo of her mother, thin, smiling faintly, wrapped in a shawl. Elise opened the laptop slowly. Her fingers hovered over the keys before typing Global Language Institute, Application Portal. She stared at the form for a long moment, then began filling it out. Name died. Languages spoken. Education. She hesitated at current occupation. She typed waitress, then paused. Backspaced. Typed again, hospitality associate. Her eyes flicked to the deadline. 2 days left. She saved the draft and exhaled. The doubt didn't vanish, but something shifted. She stood and opened her window to the night, letting the cool air in. Somewhere deep inside her, hope stirred. The next morning, Elise stood at the kitchen counter, making breakfast, simple toast and coffee. Her phone buzzed beside her. She picked it up to see a message from her mother's caretaker. "She's having a good day today. She asked about you." Elise smiled softly and dialed. The video call connected to a modest hospital room, where her mother sat propped up by pillows, wrapped in a faded scarf. "Ma chérie," her mother said weakly, her eyes lighting up. "You look tired." Elise laughed, brushing hair from her face. "You always say that." They spoke in French, with pauses filled by quiet smiles. Her mother asked if Elise was writing again. Elise hesitated, then nodded. "Something like that." Her mother smiled, proud. The call ended with promises of a visit soon. Elise stared at the blank wall in front of her, then quietly murmured, "I'll give you something to be proud of." Her voice trembled but didn't break. Later that afternoon, Elise sat at a cafe with her laptop, watching people stroll by as jazz music drifted from overhead speakers. Her shift wasn't until evening, and she was trying to rewrite her personal statement for the Language Institute. The words didn't come easily. She sipped her espresso and stared at the blinking cursor. Around her, conversations flowed in English, Mandarin, Spanish, and Arabic. Elise listened, lips barely moving as she translated silently. She overheard a man at the next table, struggling with French pronunciation on his phone. She leaned over, gently corrected him and smiled. It's comment allez-vous, not comment allez-vous. He chuckled, grateful. You speak it well. Elise nodded. Better than I serve wine. They both laughed. It was a small moment, but it gave her strength. She opened her laptop again and began to type. Language is more than sound. It's dignity. It's survival. It's home. As evening approached, Elise walked back to the restaurant in her uniform. The sun was setting, casting long shadows on the street. She passed a luxury car pulling up in front of the restaurant, Logan stepping out in a new designer suit. Their eyes met briefly. He didn't recognize her in the streetlight. Just a worker to him. Elise looked away first, but not in shame. Inside she clocked in and tied her apron tighter. The manager gave her a list of VIP tables and warned, Logan's back tonight. Elise gave a brief nod. Let him talk. As she tied her hair back into a bun, she glanced at her reflection. Calm, firm, prepared. She didn't need revenge. She needed purpose. And she was starting to remember who she really was. Every insult thrown at her had become a brick, and she was building something with it. The restaurant buzzed with quiet luxury, candles flickering on linen-covered tables. Elise moved between them like clockwork, silent, composed. Logan, once again in his favorite corner seat, waved her over with a crooked grin. Well, well, my favorite accent is back, he said, swirling his wine. Elise kept her eyes on the glass she was setting down. Whoa. Good evening, sir. Logan leaned closer, clearly baiting her. Say something French for me. Make it sound expensive. A ripple of awkwardness passed through the nearby tables. Elise paused, but didn't respond. He smirked. No sense of humor? I thought French girls were supposed to be fun. Elise locked eyes with him, her voice steady. Perhaps you've confused fun with disrespect. The table went quiet. Logan blinked, stunned for a moment, before chuckling and brushing it off. Touché, he muttered. Elise walked away, heart pounding. Every table she passed looked at her a little differently now. She didn't just serve food. She carried something unspoken. Something dignified. In the break room, Elise stood alone, staring into the bathroom mirror. She dabbed at her temples with a napkin, trying to calm her flushed skin. Her phone buzzed. A message from the Global Language Institute. Applications submitted successfully. A flicker of a smile crossed her lips. She exhaled slowly. The weight hadn't lifted, but something inside her felt grounded. Another message came through. Her mother asking how the day was going. Elise replied quickly, assuring her all was well. Her reflection stared back, a face lined with quiet storms and silent victories. The break was short. She slipped her phone away, adjusted her apron, and turned toward the door. The moment she stepped out, Logan was at the bar, laughing again with a new guest, gesturing toward her like she was part of the furniture. She's exotic, isn't she? He said, loud enough to sting. Elise didn't react. She walked past without a glance, holding her grace like armor. But this time, the sting left a scar. Later that night, Elise sat at the employee table after closing, sipping tea from a paper cup. The restaurant was silent now. Only the clink of glassware being cleaned echoed. Her co-worker Marta sat beside her, scrolling on her phone. He's disgusting, Marta said. The way he talks to you, it's not okay. Elise nodded, still watching the tea swirl in her cup. He sees what he wants to see. It doesn't make it true. Marta put her phone down. Why don't you say something louder? You could get him banned. Elise smiled faintly. Louder voices get ignored too. Sometimes silence unsettles them more. Marta nodded, not fully understanding but respecting the strength in Elise's voice. Outside, the city blinked its lights at them like a living thing. Elise took another sip. Her application was sent. Her dignity was intact. But the bruises from Logan's words, even unspoken, were real. Quiet battles, she thought, still leave scars. The next morning, Elise was back at her favorite cafe, reviewing French translations for a language blog she had started anonymously. It had no followers yet, just her thoughts translated across 3 languages. She wasn't trying to be seen, she was trying to remember herself. She typed slowly, eyes flicking between tabs of classic French poetry and modern news articles. Then, a new email came in. Your application has passed the first review. Prepare for your virtual interview. Her hands trembled. She covered her mouth for a moment, breathing through the emotion. Across the street, the city went on as usual. Cars, chatter, honking horns. But for Elise, the world had paused. She whispered, "Step 1. She looked at her reflection in the cafe window. Not the waitress, not the background character, but a woman finding her way back to who she once dreamed of being. And this time, she wasn't going to stop halfway. That evening, the restaurant prepared for a private charity dinner, sponsored by a foreign embassy. Tension buzzed in the air. Elise was assigned the head table, normally a position of trust, but tonight, it felt like a test. The manager gave her a thin smile. No mistakes. Elise nodded, her nerves sharpened but under control. Guests began to arrive, speaking in a mix of languages. Among them was the French ambassador, elegant and poised. Elise greeted him in fluent French, her accent flawless. The ambassador paused, impressed. "Your French is impeccable," he said. "It's not learned," Elise replied softly. "It's lived." Unbeknownst to her, Logan had arrived too, watching from the edge of the room. He heard her. The confidence in her tone, the elegance in her speech. Something shifted in his expression, curiosity replacing mockery, at least for a moment. Elise didn't notice. She was too focused on her role, her language, her presence. This wasn't just another dinner. It was a moment before the storm. The charity dinner was in full swing. Strings played softly in the background, silverware clinked rhythmically, and the aroma of gourmet cuisine filled the air. Elise floated from table to table with elegance, her movements graceful and efficient. At the head table, the French ambassador stood, glass in hand, preparing to deliver a toast. The host leaned toward Elise in a whisper, panic in his voice. "The translator is missing. No one speaks French well enough to interpret. Can ye?" Elise blinked, startled, but nodded. As the ambassador began speaking in eloquent French, Elise stepped forward, raising her voice clearly for the room. Her translation flowed effortlessly, poetic, dignified, and precise. Guests looked around, visibly impressed. Logan, across the room, froze mid-sip. His face shifted from confusion to disbelief. Elise spoke not as a waitress, but as a scholar, a woman of fluency and poise. By the end of the speech, the room erupted into applause. Elise bowed her head slightly, her face calm. But inside, a storm had broken, and she had walked out of it untouched. Whispers spread like wildfire. "She's fluent. Who is she?" She translated better than a professional. The ambassador leaned toward Elise. "You studied in Paris?" Elise smiled gently. "The Sorbonne, linguistics." His eyes lit up. "Impressive. And now, here?" She nodded, with no bitterness in her tone. "Life has different chapters." The ambassador raised his glass toward her. "Then you deserve a better one." Logan approached the edge of the scene, his earlier bravado gone. He watched Elise from the shadows, as if seeing her for the first time. His expression wavered, something between regret and fascination. Elise noticed him but didn't acknowledge his presence. Instead, she turned back to the ambassador, calmly continuing their conversation in French. Logan stood alone, wine untouched, the laughter drained from his features. For the first time, he wasn't the center of attention. And for the first time, he realized the room had been clapping for someone else. After the dinner, a few guests lingered, drawn to Elise not for service, but for conversation. A professor from IU asked her thoughts on bilingual education. A novelist asked if she'd ever published. She answered with modesty, but a quiet pride gleamed in her words. Logan finally approached, slower than usual, uncertain for once. "You never said you were fluent," he began. Elise turned slowly to face him, her tone neutral. "You never asked." Logan's smirk faltered. "You played me." Elise tilted her head. "I served you." The silence between them was thick with memory. Logan shifted, trying to reclaim charm. "You're not what I thought." Elise smiled thinly. "That's the point." She walked away before he could respond. Logan stood there, empty-handed, watching the woman he mocked carry herself like royalty. And suddenly, he didn't feel like a king at all. In the kitchen, the staff buzzed about what had just happened. Marta was grinning. "That was unreal," she said. "You just became someone else." Elise shook her head gently. "No, I just stopped hiding who I was." Another server clapped her on the shoulder. "You made him look like a fool." Elise didn't smile at that. That was never the goal. She wiped down the counter slowly, her movements methodical. She didn't want revenge, she wanted truth. A truth that now stood unshakable in the room she once felt invisible in. From the corridor, the manager stepped in, eyes flicking to her. "The ambassador asked to speak with you before he leaves," he said. Elise paused, surprised. She nodded and walked toward the hallway with quiet dignity. She wasn't the same woman who'd walked in at the start of the evening. Her accent was still there. But now, it carried weight. It was no longer a flaw. It was her voice, her power. The ambassador waited near the restaurant's private entrance, overcoat folded neatly on one arm. When Elise arrived, he turned to her with sincere eyes. "You have a gift, mademoiselle." Elise lowered her eyes humbly. "Thank you, sir." He reached into his coat and handed her a small card. "The Institut de Langue Mondiale is in Geneva. I'm on the board. They're expanding. They need voices like yours." Elise blinked, stunned. "You mean, send them your story," he said. "I've already recommended you." Her fingers tightened around the card. "I don't know what to say." The ambassador smiled. "Just say yes." As he walked away, Elise stood frozen, card in hand, eyes wide with disbelief. The cool air drifted through the open door behind him. She stepped outside slowly, looked up at the night sky, and breathed in deep. A single word escaped her lips. "We." The twist was no longer what she could do. It was who she truly was. And the world had finally seen it. The following evening, the restaurant buzzed again, but something had changed. Elise carried herself not as staff, but as someone who had been seen, heard, and acknowledged. Her steps were unhurried, her gaze forward. Logan arrived late, uncharacteristically alone. The maitre d' offered him a table, but he scanned the room until his eyes landed on Elise. He approached her, unsure. "About last night," he began. Elise paused, glancing at him. "You want to apologize?" she asked softly. Logan hesitated, caught off guard by her directness. "I just didn't know who you were," he muttered. Elise smiled thinly. "You mean you didn't care to?" Around them the room continued moving, but Logan stood still, exposed. Elise stepped past him, brushing no more than air. "It was never about who I was. It was about who you chose to be." For the first time, his mouth offered no comeback. He simply watched her return to her work, not out of defeat, but from the quiet clarity of being put in place. The manager approached Elise as the night wound down. "I heard what the ambassador said about you," he murmured. Elise looked up. "It wasn't for show." He nodded. "You don't belong here anymore, you know?" Elise tilted her head. "I belonged here while I needed to." He handed her a printed thank you letter from the embassy, embossed and formal. "This came for you this morning." Elise read the first line and smiled. A dinner in Geneva was scheduled the next month. They wanted her present, officially. The world she thought she'd lost was opening again. She folded the letter and tucked it in her apron. The restaurant hadn't shrunk. She'd simply outgrown it. Marta approached from behind, teasing, So, when you're rich and famous, don't forget us. Elise chuckled. You'll be the first I send postcards to. And yet, even in laughter, a goodbye was forming. This place had shaped her, but it would not hold her. At closing time, Logan remained seated, swirling a final drink, alone. Elise walked past him, ready to clock out. Wait, he said, not loud but honest. You made me look stupid. Elise didn't stop. No, you did that. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. You could have embarrassed me worse. Why didn't you? Elise paused. Because I don't need to win like you do. Logan exhaled, his defenses stripped away. You ever think about teaching? Elise raised an eyebrow. Why? He looked down. Because people listen when you speak. A beat passed. Even people like me. Elise nodded once but said nothing more. She walked away, leaving Logan surrounded by wealth and silence. And in that silence he felt, for the first time, the full cost of arrogance. She hadn't destroyed him. She had outgrown him. And he knew it. In the staff room, Elise slowly untied her apron and folded it neatly for the last time. She placed it on the counter and stared at it, remembering every insult, every late night, every silent victory. Marta hugged her tightly. Go show them what a real voice sounds like. Elise held back tears. I almost forgot it for a while. Her manager nodded respectfully from the doorway. You remembered it when it mattered most. Elise turned off her locker light and walked out without a backward glance. Out in the alley, the night air was sharp and alive. She pulled her coat tighter, a small smile rising. Above her, the city stretched into sky, bright, loud, and waiting. She wasn't running from something anymore. She was moving towards something far greater. Not because someone gave her permission, but because she finally gave it to herself. Outside the restaurant, Logan stepped into the night and saw Elise already halfway down the block. Elise, he called. She stopped but didn't turn. He jogged up beside her, unsure. I wanted to say, I've never met someone who made me feel small in the right way. Elise looked at him, her voice firm. That's not my job. It's your responsibility to grow. He nodded slowly. Maybe I'll start learning. Elise turned toward the street. Start by listening. He stood there, watching as she walked away, not defeated, not cruel, just done. A final glance over her shoulder showed not triumph, but peace. That was her victory. Not revenge. Not applause. But wholeness. Logan remained behind in the glow of the restaurant lights, just a man in the wake of a woman who finally reclaimed her story. And as Elise disappeared into the city, the quiet said everything. The next morning, Elise sat by her apartment window, sunlight spilling across her notebook, and a steaming cup of coffee. She'd called her mother first thing. They want me in Geneva, she said softly in French. Her mother cried, laughter and tears tangled. You didn't give up, she whispered. Elise replied, I almost did, but something in me remembered who I was. Her tiny apartment, once a place of quiet survival, now felt like the final page of one chapter. She looked out at the city not with resignation, but with quiet affection. It hadn't broken her. It had sharpened her. She picked up her pen and began writing again. A letter, not for a program or a job, but for herself. Her voice on the page flowed freely now, unfiltered by shame or fear. The girl who had arrived in this city afraid was gone. The woman at this window was ready. She smiled at the sunlight and whispered to no one, Je suis prête. I am ready. Later that day, Elise began packing. She pulled clothes from her minimal closet, folded them neatly, and set aside her collection of worn-out notebooks, each filled with language, quotes, and phrases that carried her through. As she reached for a framed photo of her and her father, her fingers paused. She stared at it for a moment, then smiled. You'd laugh at how long I let them keep me quiet, she whispered. Her eyes flicked to her laptop, open to an email confirming her interview date. She added the final confirmation. See you in Geneva. Marta knocked lightly and stepped in, holding a box of pastries. "For the road," she said. Elise laughed. "Bribing me to stay?" Marta shrugged. "Reminding you where you came from." Elise hugged her. "I'll never forget it." This was more than moving. It was shedding the last remnants of doubt. Her bags weren't heavy, but they were full of everything she'd fought to reclaim. News had traveled faster than Elise expected. A guest from the dinner had uploaded a clip of her translating for the ambassador. It had gone viral. A title read, "Waitress stuns elite gala with fluent French." The comments poured in, admiration, praise, shock. Even local news outlets picked it up. Logan's name was tagged, but he stayed silent. At the restaurant, co-workers shared the video, cheering as if it were their own victory. But Elise stayed off social media. She sat in the quiet of her room, reading only one thing, her acceptance email. She had been offered a full scholarship and a position on the advisory board for cultural translation studies. Not just invited, but needed. She leaned back in her chair, laughter spilling out, light, free, disbelieving. For once, the world hadn't just looked at her. It had seen her. Fully. But the following evening, Elise returned to the restaurant one last time, not in uniform, but in a navy blue dress that fit her like confidence. The staff clapped as she entered. The major raised a glass. "To the voice we nearly missed." Marta hugged her tightly, whispering, "Now go speak for all of us." Elise took the moment in. Faces, laughter, smells of spices and wine. Everything that had once overwhelmed her now felt like background music to her story. Logan was not there. She didn't need him to be. His absence wasn't a wound, it was just silence. Elise stood by the bar and gave a short farewell, thanking them for their part in her journey. "This place taught me how to carry silence until it became strength." They toasted to her. Not a waitress. Not a background extra. But a woman whose story had finally taken the microphone. On the train to Geneva, Elise sat by the window, the city slowly fading behind her. Fields rolled past, skies opened wide, and her reflection watched her quietly in the glass. She opened her notebook one last time and wrote, "The accent they mocked is the one I will teach with. The silence they expected is the one I filled with language. And the girl they overlooked, she became the woman who chose herself." She closed the notebook and placed it in her bag. Across the aisle, a child asked his mother how to say hello in French. Elise leaned over and said gently, "Bonjour." The child beamed. His mother smiled. And just like that, the journey began, not from shame, but from purpose. As the sun dipped below the hills, Elise sat tall, proud, not running from her past, not even chasing her future, just claiming it, word by word, breath by breath. Elise stepped off the train into the heart of Geneva, the station pulsing with movement and elegance. The city greeted her with clean air, sharp light, and voices in every language. A welcome sign from the institute staff bore her name, held high by a young woman, smiling warmly. Elise approached, her suitcase gliding behind her, confidence in every step. "Bienvenue, Mademoiselle Laurent," the woman said. Elise smiled, her French easy and fluid. "Merci, it's good to be home, again." The streets of Geneva sparkled under late morning sun, crisp and alive. Elise looked around, taking in the architecture, the symmetry, the precision. But most of all, the sound of languages drifting through the air like music. She wasn't overwhelmed. She was part of it. A piece finally returned to its place in the mosaic. This wasn't a second chance. It was the first time she was walking through the door, knowing she belonged. The Language Institute stood like a modern cathedral, glass walls catching light from every direction, open spaces humming with purpose. Elise was led through sunlit corridors lined with global maps and portraits of linguists, authors, poets. Her guide introduced her to the director, a kind man with gentle eyes who shook her hand firmly. "We've been waiting for someone like you," he said. Elise smiled, still absorbing the reality. She was shown her office, a small but elegant space with a window overlooking the lake. A nameplate already sat on the desk, Elise Laurent, Cultural Linguistics Fellow. She traced the letters with her fingertips. This wasn't a dream. It was her signature written on the world, finally visible. As she sat at the desk, her heart full but steady, she whispered to herself, "Let's begin." The past didn't disappear, but it had finally made room for her future. Her first lecture wasn't in a grand hall but in a quiet seminar room with students from all over the world. As they settled into their seats, Elise stood before them, hands loosely clasped. "You may hear an accent when I speak," she began, "but you should know that accent carries history, identity, and power." The room went still. "Today, we're not learning a language. We're learning how language shapes the soul." She continued with ease, switching between French, English, and Arabic. Eyes widened. Pen scribbled faster. She wasn't teaching to prove anything. She was giving the same gift she once fought to preserve: voice. Every student sat forward, pulled not just by the material, but by the energy in her words. Elise no longer translated for the powerful. She helped the unheard speak, and in doing so, became the voice of her own revolution. Weeks later, Elise strolled through a busy plaza in Geneva, coffee in hand. Street musicians played nearby, and the smell of roasted chestnuts filled the air. A man at a corner cafe struggled to order in French. "Croissant, grande?" Elise smiled and stepped in gently. "You're asking for a big crescent," she said, grinning. The man laughed nervously. "And how should I say it?" Elise replied with grace. "Un grand café, s'il vous plaît." He repeated it slowly. She nodded with approval. From a nearby table, a young woman watched, phone in hand, recording discreetly. The moment was simple, but pure. Later, that clip would circulate online, captioned, "She teaches with kindness, even in the street." Elise didn't notice. She kept walking, blending into the world she once felt so distant from. Her lessons were everywhere now. And this was her fluency made human. In the final scene, Elise stood before a glass wall overlooking Lake Geneva, dusk casting lavender hues across the water. Behind her the city buzzed, but in this moment time held still. She turned as if hearing a familiar voice, but no one was there. Only the echo of everything she'd lived. The restaurant. The silence. The mocking. The revelation. The choice. All of it had brought her here. She walked slowly toward the glass, placed a hand on it, and whispered in French. Language doesn't define intelligence, but ignorance always exposes itself. Her reflection stared back, older, wiser, free. The world would remember her not as the girl with the accent, but the woman who rewrote what that accent meant. A single line scrolled across the screen as her image faded. The voice they mocked became the voice that moved nations. Fade to black.